All right. All right, just give me a second. I'll open my timer. Just give me a
All
second.
right.
7 minutes. One. I'll be starting in about 3, 2, 1. Let's go. All right. All right, man. So let's first evaluate this debate in terms of who the actor is, right? We're talking about environmentalists here, right? I think one fundamental thing that's true of all environmentalists is obviously that they care about maintaining the environment, they care about the ecological damage that humans are currently causing. And secondly, environmentalists, because of the intersectionality that is inherent in environmentalism, also care about like for example the oppressive systems that are currently dominate human society, right? Let's talk about why this is relevant, why Bitcoin is relevant to them, right? Bitcoin is relevant to them mainly because of how Bitcoin mining works. So Bitcoin mining works in a way. So for example, if for those who don't know, it's essentially the computer is running a bunch of calculations or a bunch of trying to solve a bunch of problems. This requires immense amounts of computational power. Because it requires this much computational power, and because of it requires a lot of energy, right? So you're essentially running 5 very advanced computers on their full power, full speed, and that takes up a lot of energy, which leads to a lot of emissions, right? Which is the basic fundamentals that you need to understand, right? What happens when devaluation happens, right? So when devaluation of Bitcoin happens, the value to investors and the people who have currently invested in Bitcoin goes down, and it creates an incentive for people to not invest in Bitcoin, right? Because then it's like, okay, if the valuation is going to go down that quickly or that low, I think the incentive for miners also goes down, right? Why is this extremely important, right? Because the fundamental part of this case, and I think what I need to explain to you in order to win, is that the benefits of Bitcoin accrue largely to the wealthy section of society, and its benefits are and its harms, which are much greater in number, but they disproportionately affect the poor, the marginalized, right? Why is that the case, right? Let's look at what actually results in from these climate emissions, right? Bitcoin generates a lot of climate emissions. I think it's a fact in this debate, right? What actually happens due to these climate emissions, right? Firstly, it disproportionately impacts poor people, it disproportionately impacts people in developing countries, and it disproportionately impacts people because these poor people in developing countries don't have the capital or the benefit to actually advance, like invest in Bitcoin and gain from it any of its advantages, right? These people are just suffering the harms caused by these emissions, right? And secondly, what does this actually another important thing, and one thing that differentiates it from other parts of the economy which also contribute emissions, is that unlike, say, for example, industrialization, which although it generates a lot of emissions and should be improved, also industrialization leads to employment, it leads to economic development. I don't think Bitcoin does that. I don't think it has even downstream effects of improving the lives of poor people or improving the lives of other things, right? Because a lot of things that generate climate emissions, for example, resource extraction or things like that, like these actually have at least some economic development benefits, right? And these harms that I think I'm talking of are very real, right? For example, if you look at Iran, so many cities in Iran, like last month, went through blackouts because so many miners were running their machines to generate Bitcoin, right? Secondly, and the what we think Bitcoin is actually resulting in is, you look at China, right? What's happening in China is that there were a number of townships and provinces where they were planning to shut down coal power plants, right? Because they didn't need them any further. However, what happened is that essentially Bitcoiners like wanted to mine so much, they wanted too much power, they wanted too much electricity, because in order to meet those requirements, they kept running the coal power plants, right? And that's a significant harm into the cause of climate change, and something that environmentalists should be extremely cognizant of, right? Let's talk of the adequate uses, right? Because who benefits from Bitcoin, right? An increase in the valuation of Bitcoin benefits basically rich people and extremely upper middle class people, because they are the ones who have actually invested in these things, right? Secondly, why do we think it's not even beneficial as a financial innovation? Is firstly because currently it's only usage as a currency is in illegal markets like heroin and like on the essentially the dark web, right? Why is it not useful as a currency? Well, if your currency goes up and down, up and down, up and down, like it's not very useful as a store of currency. It's not very useful if you can't actually use it in any fucking transaction, right? At the end of the day, it's not good as a currency, right? So what is it good for? It's good as a speculative investment, because if you as an investor have the potential to bear this sort of extreme volatility, firstly, you're probably very rich, because if you can afford that, and secondly, you're trying to get benefit from speculation. I don't think this sort of speculation is actually useful to the economy, and it only benefits rich people, right? So lastly, let's get to my main constructives here, right? Why do I think a fall in the amount of investment in Bitcoin actually bring great benefits to the environment? Firstly, it leads to the amount of resources that have currently been diverted to Bitcoin will probably have to be channelized somewhere else, right? I think it's a personal opinion, but honestly, most actual like companies and most startups, for example, green friendly startups or startups that are trying to change fundamental parts of the economy, they will benefit from this rechannelizing of investment, right? Secondly, let's talk about human resources, right? Because this is very important, right? So we think that like people who have the ability to work in cryptocurrency and like very smart Silicon Valley tech people, like we need to put them and utilize them in areas where they'll contribute the most to society. Currently, if they see that the Bitcoin valuation is extremely high, if they work in cryptocurrency, then they are contributing to something that only benefits them, right? It's a restricted personal benefit and doesn't and causes enormous harm, right? I think at a point in time when Bitcoin becomes much less valuable, some of those people will go work at SolarX, SolarCity. They will go work at all of these really advanced climate energy companies because they are also extremely exciting, right? And one thing as environmentalists you should recognize is that in order to solve climate change, you need a lot of advancements in technology, right? We want the smartest people in our society working on these problems, right? At a point in time where Bitcoin gets devalued, I think there's going to be a reorientation of like essentially employer markets and a reorientation of financial markets towards the end of more channelizing these investments into things that potentially look very good, right? Because climate change is also a big risk. Investors want to hedge against this risk, so they should invest in climate friendly companies rather than investing in Bitcoin, which offers them other benefits, right? I think this sort of extreme devaluation and extreme volatility I think fundamentally one thing you need to understand is that it will lead to probably better regulation, right? Because currently this market has gone completely unregulated and essentially it's essentially a financial instrument market which doesn't have the same sort of regulation that other parts of the financial industry face, right? At a point in time where the valuation goes down, I think governments are much more likely to step in, and this regulation actually helps the economy and thus helps people. And this regulation helps people essentially because then Bitcoin will not be probably used as the sort of illegal currency that it is currently used as, right? At that point in time, we provide you with significant benefits to the devaluation of Bitcoin because these benefits accrue largely to the marginalized, to largely to poor people, and much less to investors who are just trying to benefit from mere speculation of whether Elon Musk tweets a good tweet and Bitcoin rises by 20%, right? I think it's much more important to make sure that resources are being used properly, not only are resources being used properly, but the kind of emissions that these cause, like the emissions, because again, the fact at the end of this question and my final point is, let's look at who benefits. And who are the investors and who actually is affected, right? Who is going to face the brunt of the actual impact of this? It's developing countries, and it's like the poor people who actually aren't investing in Bitcoin. They bear all of the harms. They get none of the benefits. Thank you. For all of these reasons, I'm extremely proud to propose.
Thank you for that. Next, we call upon the Leader of Opposition.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. All right. If there's any POI, just unmute yourself. Yeah. Bastri and Karendi should do this well. All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I have one clarifications to make in this debate, and I think that this is need to be properly engaged, right? Just because Bitcoin are extremely devalued in the current status quo, it does not mean and does not necessarily mean that suddenly people are not going to mine Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency that are already existing within the market, right? This is the reasons why I think the biggest arguments and the biggest burden for government to actually prove is why it is likely for people to actually abandon that, besides telling you that it is volatile and so on and so forth. Because we argue the idea of the volatility of the cryptocurrency is what makes Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency are so appealing towards this current status quo, right? But then we argue that the extreme devaluations of Bitcoin will only result in one thing. It is not the decrease of the demand towards Bitcoin, but in fact, it will increase the demand and perpetuate more environmental degradations, exactly because now people are going to invest more and more towards the Bitcoin because they see there is an accessible way for me to opt in right now at the end of the day, right? This means that the goal that the government team want to prevent will perpetuate it even more in their side of the house, right? But I'm going to point out one thing about the opening government cases. I do not necessarily understand that why many of their arguments coming from the opening government in fact are not an argumentation that are successfully linked back to the interest of the environmentalists. I think that it is a consensus in both sides that environmentalists desires the betterment for the environment, right? This is what the opening opposition are going to prove to you. If we're able to prove to you why, number one, Bitcoin are going to rise up even after being extremely devalued, and these rising up are going to be even are going to impact the future even more to the extent that more people are going to invest in Bitcoin, then we take over government benches, right? I'm going to break it to argumentation. Number one, the extreme devaluation of Bitcoin will perpetuate further demand towards Bitcoin in the future. And second, even if not, the celebration is mistargeted. Number one, I think that Bitcoin are going to rise up significantly in the future. Fourth thing, number one, the existence of numerous public figures ranging from experts to politicians that still values Bitcoin very highly. They are still confident that the Bitcoin will rise in the future. This instantly grants a sense of confidence towards the people to continue to participate in the crypto market to begin with, right? Because they have understand that in the past, this is also the method of Bitcoin to suddenly rise up again. It needs to fall down at first, right? Second, excess numbers glorifications of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin in many of the social media that tells only positive and success story from people who invest and mine Bitcoin, right? This is what actually happens in my TikTok FYP, for example. Many people such as Felicia Saka actually tell me, yo, go and invest in Bitcoin because it's going to be really good for your futures and so on and so forth, without actually providing me informed consent about what kind of products Bitcoin actually is at the end of the day, right? This illusion them, especially those that are not really understand about Bitcoin to begin with, right? Three, people will enter into crypto market mostly because they love the acceleration sensation of winning. They love to suddenly win big amount with a significant lesser efforts as possible, right? If they can win thousands of millions of dollars immediately, then they are not going to work from 9 to 5 and so on and so forth, right? Those people in the past who are so this kind of person will also invest a lot in Bitcoin, especially because of this kind of sensation, right? But fourthly, those people in the past who already possess and win significant portions from cryptocurrency will continue to live in this market. Number one, because they understand, then they think that they will be able to procure and cover up their losses in the future. Because yes, I previously had won and I previously stayed faith on the Bitcoin, then what stopped me from winning in the future at the end of the day, right? But secondly, those kind of people will, that's it. And they are thrilled by the sense of liberations, addicted to this feeling, and want to continue experience this feeling over and over again at the end of the day, right? But look, even if those people are not going to invest in Bitcoin, they're still going to mine in other forms of cryptocurrency, especially because they are blinded by the illusion. If the Bitcoin that previously are very, very irrelevant in values can become big, then what's stopping the other cryptocurrency to not become just like Bitcoin, right? The potential of cryptocurrency are still huge, and these four reasons is why most people are still going to invest in Bitcoin, even when it is currently extremely devaluing at the end of the day, right? So we argue that this analysis proves you one thing, that Bitcoin will rise again, and those people who will exploit the current status quo where Bitcoin prices are significantly low to gamble their fortunes on Bitcoin to begin with. Look, exactly because the significant demand of people hoping that Bitcoin will rise, the Bitcoin will actually rise, right? Because Bitcoin are still treated as an important asset even within the current status quo that people are willing to risk at the end of the day. Even worse, since many people now are being involved because now the values of the Bitcoin are devalued, meaning that more people have more confidence to actually participate because they know now I can actually purchase Bitcoins. Many values are now being imposed towards Bitcoin even larger than before. This is what happened in the past when Bitcoin extremely devalued in 2018. From 50 million per one Bitcoin, now they reach 500 million rupiah per one Bitcoin. What does this imply? Number one, the mining of Bitcoin will perpetuate in the world of government. And I think the clashes are contingent upon the likelihood analysis each brand provided. Will provide you with a much better likelihood analysis. But even if not, these celebrations are also mistargeted. Two reasons on this. Number one, the reasons why laptop and processor are increasing in price and rarity will significantly also, was not only because the demand of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, right? I think that most people that purchase and invest in Bitcoin usually purchase a lot of laptop processors to mine that at the end of the day, and this contribute to the carbon emissions, right? Look, I think that the demand of the laptop and processors will still increase symmetrically in both sides, because independently, the demand towards laptop and processor are increasing with or without Bitcoin. Due to the existence of COVID-19, people are being forced to stay at home, work at home, and study at home, and so on and so forth. This is the reasons why now laptop and processors and other mobile devices are the prerequisites for the people to be able to live properly as a human being, right? These are the reasons why the demand towards that are going to be very, very increasing. This is the burden of government to prove, and why just because the decrease of Bitcoin, then suddenly this demand are going to decrease, right? But second, I think what we should celebrate the idea of when the productions of those processors and the production and the entire process, this entire supply chain that creates these processors are going to be healthy to begin with, right? Because many people invested and depend on Bitcoin, both are environmentalists or not environmentalists. Those people are still vulnerable because they depend so much, right? I think that what we should celebrate is the idea of how can this particular Intel company or Asus or any forms of laptop company are able to make processors that is more environmental friendly. I think that this is what we should celebrate in the side of opposition. Very proud to propose. Oh.
We thank Elo for that speech. Now we call upon DPM.
Right, perfect. Just give me 15 seconds, I'll start.
Oh yes, can we have your POI preference, please?
Right, I'll take them through chat. Just put a timestamp for 5:30 because I'd like to take a POI from closing.
All right.
Perfect. I'll put my own. Right, perfect. Am I clearly audible?
Yes, you are.
Perfect. Right. But perfect. Okay. Right. Panel, I'll be just let me put my timer. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, we think over straw manning this debate. Why do we say so? Panel, realize that the motion is that the House will. All right. I'm so sorry. I just got lost. All right. My phone just went off. Just give me a second. I'm so sorry. Right. Perfect. Can I start again? Is that if that's not an issue?
Sure.
Right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Yes. Panel, we think always straw man this debate. What is the motion? The motion is the House as environmentalists celebrate the extreme devaluation of cryptocurrency. Realize, first of all, it's an active debate, but secondly, realize that it is not our burden to prove to you that what is the incentive for the miners to stop mining Bitcoin. Secondly, it is not our burden to prove to you that what if Bitcoin's price goes up again. Simply, our burden is that why should we celebrate this devaluation at a point of time that it happens, right? That is, it is not a burden to prove what if it goes up again and what will happen. happen then? But we still engage with O, right? What do they tell us? Realize panel, at a point of time when they make claims like, oh, it will increase the demand of Bitcoin again, and Bitcoin will spur up again and will increase demand, realize that O does not understand the difference between volatility-led decrease in the value of Bitcoin and extreme decrease in the price of that, right? Realize at a point of time when they give you examples where Bitcoin decrease in value by 100 or even $200 million, realize that the market of Bitcoin is that volatile that if you get that decrease in the very first place, that is a volatility-led decrease. That's not an extreme decrease that has been spurred by anything in particular, right? That is to say, at a point of time, if it even if Bitcoin even decrease in value by 100 or $200 million, for example, there's a volatility-led decrease, and that cannot be equated with the extreme decrease that we are celebrating at this point of time, right? At that point of time, realize panel, at a point of time when you go ahead and say that there will be an extreme decrease and we will celebrate that, that decrease look like a multiple large amount of decrease. That is to say that the particular Bitcoin is only left in 1/4 or 1/5 or 1/6 of its value, right? At that point of time, that's the extreme decrease that we're talking about. Realize at a point of time there's a basic econ 101, there's a trade-off that an investor has to make, right? That is to say, do I think this currency will go up again first, or if it will go up again, I will invest it, but if I think it won't go up, if I won't invest it. At a point of time, we are debating here about the structural changes that will be made. That is to say, investment will go away, the people working will go away. That kind of thing. There is structural change that will take place in that market, and that point of time, realize that the decrease will not be like a short-term decrease, and they will not trigger investment and will not decrease the demand in the very first place. But then they make a very weird argument by saying, oh, laptop and computer are used for animations, and even if you don't go ahead and buy this, even go ahead and tackle this, people will still buy laptops and this panel. Realize that they believe that you can mine Bitcoin on a particular my MacBook Pro in which I attend my college class, like that absurd panel. Realize at the point of time you go ahead and mining Bitcoin, realize very high level professional computers. That is to say, that is the highest level of computers that are in a professional capacity that is only bought to mine that particular Bitcoin. First, second, realize that the processors that are required, it's not only about the computer but the processor that is required. Realize that you need a professional processor just to go ahead and mine that Bitcoin, and it has power enough, as Shivan justifies, even it can cause blackouts in fucking countries. At that point of time, how are they equating it with a normal laptop is something we do not understand. That is to say that the energy laws that are happening with Bitcoin 1,000 times more than what we're actually talking about. What do we tell you, panel? At a point of time, you're going ahead and do this. Realize that at a point you go ahead and disincentivize this. There can be better utilization of the renewable resources. Like that is to say, when you're using this energy from these different kinds of processors and high-tech computers, you can go ahead and use this in different kinds of protection for the environment. That is to say, you can shift from coal or non-renewable source of energy to a renewable source of energy through the environment if you disincentivize the use of energy in this particular manner. First, second, what do you realize the economic impact, and that is something that you do not deal with. It. When you realize at point of time you go ahead and engage this in Bitcoin, what you're actually the particular people that you're actually benefiting is the rich and the ultra rich, because they're only the ones who have access to the stock market, to this particular Bitcoin market in the very first place. At that point of time, realize panel, if you go ahead and take out money, the economic impact, but the trader that you're making is the rich, making the rich more richer, or reducing the sufferings of these people who are the rich, poor, lower middle class, or the poor people. At that point of time, realize that on a basic trader, we think the benefit that will accrue to the lower middle class or poor is much higher. So at the point of time, when they come and tell you, oh, if they don't mine Bitcoins, these people, engineers, will mine other cryptocurrencies. We think that they are not debating in the spirit of the motion. Realize when we talk about Bitcoin, it is a manifestation of the entire all the cryptos. It's not only one Bitcoin in particular. At that point of time, we tell you at a point of time, when you disincentivize them, there's an extreme decrease. We celebrate it because a lot of, even if not all, a lot of skilled engineers go out of this profession and find better professions because they're extremely are accruing a loss from that. At that point of time, realize there's a higher propensity for these engineers to go in environmental areas or work towards the environment or green air resources or green power stations, as Shivan justifies to it, because these industries also need high-tech manpower. At that point of time, realize when a net benefit that we're getting for the environmentalists by going and doing this. But next panel, what do we tell you? There is a reduction in the Bitcoin as currency to fund malicious operation. Realize Bitcoin in the status quo is essentially used as currency to fund millions of operations such as terrorism, etc. At that point, when we reduce this Bitcoin leading to this currency because it's so fluctuating, realize the terrorist activities or like any activities that are actually causing harm to the environment now decrease because the currency that you are using for these particular activities now gets disincentivized. At that point of time, realize panel that the environmental impact that this will have will also be in the form of reduction of the funding of terrorism in that form, right? But next next panel, what do we tell you? Realize that the impact on the government, right? Now, at a point of time when there's extreme devaluation of the currency by the government, there's an incentive by this government to now regulate this particular crypto market that like it is going ahead and doing. So at that point of time, realize that that the government is benefiting as well as it is making this cryptocurrency more accessible to a more diverse set of people. Before that, PYCO, go ahead.
Do you support the volatility of Bitcoin?
Do I support? Is that the question?
Do you support the volatility of Bitcoin?
All right, panel. I do not understand whether the question was asked in my personal capacity as an environmentalist. If it's in personal capacity, I don't think it's relevant to the bit. But environmentalist, yes, it does, right? And at a point of time, we want to make a clear distinction between the decrease in the value of these particular Bitcoin due to a volatility and due to an extreme decrease that have been triggered by structural factors. At that point in time, this distinction is what it should be considered important debate, and that is something that's justified to you. But panel, after that, what do we tell you? At that point of time, maybe go ahead and reduce the amount that you're going and investing in Bitcoin and go ahead and use this in different channelize your investment in other areas. Realize the harm that you will be causing directly to the environment and to the environment will be much less. First, but second, realize that now your investments wherever will be channelized. For example, in making a building or investing in particular real assets instead of only financial assets. At that point of time, realize that you're also generating employment in these cases because these people now get a chance to work because they're investing their money onto something that actually brings some structural changes in the economy and not only financial assets that have no fucking contribution to the environment. What do we give you, panel? We tell you that on our side of the balance, we celebrate it because it favors the lower middle class and poor people. Second, it will lead to channeling of wealth into more productive investment. Third, we value there will be better utilization of skilled human resources. Fourth, we tell you there will be reduction in Bitcoin as currency to fund malicious operations. Fifth, we tell you that it forces the government to regulate investment, which will be better for all the people who have access to these Bitcoins. Last, we tell you that it leads to better utilization of renewable resources like coal, etc. For those reasons, we're very, very opposed.
Thank you for that speech. Next, we call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
And lastly, what they do is that they say that bring argument of backlash in the society. Again, this is an evaluation motion, so not necessarily. But then again, even if backlash, okay, aren't environmentalists already seen as economically against and like they're going to get backlash? So yeah, OO is out. So OG, they told you that poor people cannot access Bitcoin and hence they only face the repercussion. I think this is just putting the minority and the poor people argument for the sake of it so that they can win the round easier. Like, do note that it's extremely hard to find the link back between poor people and this particular argument and the interest of environmentalists. Like, it's the job of the argument to give people job and not the environmentalists. So that's out. But also middle class can access it. If I want to rebut it, like middle class can access it. They're also an important and disenfranchised part of the society as opposed to just the poorest of the poorest, right? But yeah, they are more vulnerable, but again, not affected. Like, secondly, they talk about regulation. Like, so do you support the increase of cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or not, right? Because do note that if you regulate it, and this is something that CG agrees on, meaning that more transaction will happen. If more transaction happens, that would mean more fossil fuel needed because that means more data required, more CPU, more GPU, and etc., right? So that would mean regulation both on CG and OG would equate to more fossil fuel and more environmental damages and such. This is especially true, by the way, because fossil fuel, and they will not change to green energy, by the way, CG, because fossil fuel is extremely cheap right now, knowing the fact that there are a massive oversupply done by the United States government, and there are a massive amount of decrease of demand since transportation is extremely below due to the coronavirus and such, right? So fossil fuel will stay in the Bitcoin round. CG, they'll tell you environmental friendly product and managing and calling out company and etc. A lot of rebuttals to this. This is greenwashing, because just because you bring environmental friendly product like straws and etc., carbon emission still exists, and this comes from fossil fuel. Secondly, this does not talk about Bitcoin. Like, this work for every single effort for any single company. This is not exclusive to Bitcoin, guys. Thirdly, so the profits received are not as huge as the cost. That's what they tell you to the company. But cryptocurrency are not made by company. Like, some random people can make Dogecoin, and the people who is benefited by it are the marketplace that sells Bitcoin, like, you know, Toko Crypto and etc. Right? So this is different from like company creating Bitcoin like Unilever or anything, right? Just anyway, making people realize regulation is controlling supply and etc. But again, if regulation happens, more people opt in, and that would mean more fossil fuel emission. I don't think I really need to engage a lot more. This has already done a lot of it. They want regulation, that's bad because more transaction and requires more fossil fuel. They want, calling out company. Again, Bitcoin is not made by company. Random people can just make Bitcoin if they want to. Cryptocurrency, sorry, if they wanted to. So yeah, we're going to talk about stable price equal to stable transaction. The title of your, or the tagline of your company, for example, right? So the basic principle that we've already told you, more transaction equates to more carbon emission and fossil fuel needed due to it having a larger variable to process and more data stored and etc. Right? We thought Bitcoin is a harm that exists regardless. We agree to this, but we prefer a more stable price where it doesn't devaluate to that extent and increase prices to that extent to begin with. We think this would result to a lesser amount of transaction. Because again, the characterization that was again considered by every single team in this debate is that they are in for the high of it and they're in for the hype. So if you tell them that they, yeah, I'm going to explain this later on and etc. Right? But yeah, do note of this particular statement to begin with, right? So yeah, but before that, they will tell you, oh, price is different with value. But notice that those things are parallel, right? Price are parallel with value because they will mean more people, people would needs to access, because there are individual that is going to say, and you can buy it at a cheaper price, and then later on selling the cryptocurrency at a much larger price, and etc. So how would this look like, right? How does, devaluation equates to more transaction? A, Bitcoin buyers are high followers, and hence they would want the smallest amount of cost for the highest amount of benefit. For problem. Firstly, the problem when it devaluates is that people will buy a bunch of it since it's cheaper and they will see it as a quick way to get an amount of money. Secondly, then it will rise since Bitcoin works on the basis of sold and buy, demand and supply. So more people buying it, and then the demand would increase, price will increase, and then it will also becomes much more, and that is the meaning of volatility, both ups and downs, and that would mean, right, more people wanting to sell it and more people seeing the benefit of Bitcoin, and hence they want to sell it, right? The circle continues and it increases. The narrative on our side is that when it's stable, it doesn't devalue that much and increase that much, and people who want the lowest cost for the highest amount of benefit, that is the most people opt in for the hype, will not get in because they feel like it's just a smaller margin of benefit. Secondly, more volatility equates to more processing power required. Since it requires more data and more variable for computer to process, because the prices goes up and down so much, then they will need more complex computer and more computer to process the variables and the data. Thirdly, volatility equates to more promotion because now cryptocurrency are not owned by anyone. Again, we have told you that cryptocurrency are sold by Bitcoin marketplace like Toko Crypto. So the market is now owned by the Bitcoiners creator, but owned by the marketplace. And when they see the valuation, they would, scramble their head as to how they're going to sell this at a cheaper price, and hence so that more transaction will happen. Transaction is bad because again, environmentalists, this debate happens in the perspective of environmentalists, and CO is the only thing that can, connect the dot here, adjudicator, and saying that fossil fuel will most likely be used even more when there are more transactions. We tell you that there are more transactions that's going to happen when volatility exists at the end of the day, right? Very proud to oppose.
All right, next we call upon the government whip.